order of business, if you could please silence your mobile devices, that would be excellent. And I will do the same.
Silence. Yes, okay.
So, good afternoon and welcome on behalf of the Women's Foreign Policy Group and one of our board members here with us today, Stephanie Foster.
I'm just sitting down.
Very good. Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
We're so glad that you could all join us. I'm Patricia Ellis, president of the Women's Foreign Policy Group. We promote women's leadership, women's voices on pressing international issues of the day. Some of the things we've done lately, just to give you a feel, we've had two fantastic embassy events with the ambassador of Mexico, the ambassador of Jordan, a woman, a program with top journalists on Trump national security policy. We will be having an event on climate change coming up. We do a lot on UN-related issues, both here in DC and in New York, have an author series, etc. So we hope that you will not only come to our events, but also join us as an organization. And there's information here, and you could speak to anyone outside if you have interest in that. One other program we have coming up, which I think would be of great interest to people in this room. It's being hosted by the ambassador of Belgium, and it's on bridging the humanitarian development gap with the World Bank CEO, Kristalina Georgieva. So we also, the other part of our activities, and it relates today very much, is mentoring and career-oriented activities. Every year we hold a big mentoring fair in both New York and DC. In DC it's at GW, in New York it's at NYU. And Christina is one of our favorite mentors. She was just there last February. And we hope to be doing more and certainly responding to the request to do more, particularly for people in mid-career and senior positions. So when I was contacted again by the UN Department of Field Support and Field Personnel Division for the second time, we jumped at the opportunity, and this time we are partnering with WISE, Women in International Security. So I think some of you are members, and we're very happy to be working together on this. So I just wanted to tell you just a bit about Christina, who has a very impressive career. She's chief of the recruitment section of the UN Department of Field Support and Field Personnel Division, and she's been there since 2012. She has 20 years experience working on conflict-affected countries for organizations working in the field, and her expertise is on humanitarian operations, post-conflict development, peace building, peacekeeping, and technical expertise is post-war peace building and reintegration of war-affected populations, strategic planning for peace operations, and operations support. And in terms of where she served in the former Yugoslavia, West Africa, and most recently in Central Africa, where she spent 18 months setting up the youngest peacekeeping operation. And she has worked not only for the UN in a variety of positions for a number of years, but she worked for the OSCE, USAID, State Department, and IRC. So please join me in welcoming Christina Koch. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, every time I come here, I really feel like it's kind of a homecoming. First of all, Patricia, because, you know, I was a mentoree by the Women's Foreign Policy Group in 1995 and 96 when I was at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, right around the corner.
Right.
And, you know, I think it's important the Women's Foreign Policy Group has this mentoring and career development element as part of its mandate. And I see a lot of women around the table who, look, you look like you might be around mid-career. I think it's also important that we give back, right? And I remember the days when I was a master's student, and really the Women's Foreign Policy Group mentor took me by the hand and really, really helped me get my first job. And I was a human rights officer in Bosnia with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. But it's not that she just helped me get the job. She said, Christina, you need to go study Serbo-Croatian, and found me somebody to do that. Then she said, oh, here's an opportunity. I'm gonna find the recruiter that's responsible for that. So, really, it's that follow through of mentorship that's so important. And, women helping women is a really important element in international affairs. We are in the minority, but we're there, and there can be more of us, and we need to help each other get there. So it's really in that spirit.
Yes, well, thank you.
It's really in that spirit that I've come today, and I thank you for coming. And I just challenge you to think about this as an opportunity for yourself, but also to give back. So, the agenda that we have today is I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of, the scope and scale of UN peace operations, then talk a little bit about the initiatives that we have going on, including the Senior Women Talent Pipeline, and also how this fits into the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres's gender parity agenda. So that's our approach. So, this slide, it shows really the scope and scale of UN peace operations. We're in 36 countries. That includes both the big peacekeeping operations, as well as the small special political missions. And I always say, the branding of UN peace operations is really focused on the soldiers. So if you go online, everybody has a blue helmet and they're saving lives in very arduous circumstances. And it's true, there are over, about 100,000 plus soldiers as part of UN peace operations, but there are also about 8,500 civilians contracted, through a sort of an expatriate salary package. And there's also about 16,000 national staff. So the civilian component of peacekeeping and peace operations doesn't get a lot of press, but it's a really significant part of our operation, and it's also the backbone because we're the career experts, and we set up missions. We give the political, logistical, and administrative support to make them happen, and it's really a career path for a lot of people. So another thing that I just wanted to tell you is the footprint of that civilian international component is not maybe what you would think, right? Because we're supporting this big number of soldiers and police, the logistics side is really heavy. So where it says support, that includes things like supply chain, engineering, IT, everything to do with administration, finance, human resources. And that's actually by far the biggest part of the footprint, because not only do they administer the civilian component, but they administer the troops. And so a lot of people in working in peacekeeping in particular, if they work in logistics, for instance, a lot of former military, but at the same time, if you're working on the support side of things, maybe you worked for a multinational that works in developing countries like Toyota or Shell, something like that. So I wanted to really send the message that actually one of the biggest gender gaps that we have is on the support side, IT, engineering, logistics, finance in particular. And then another big part of our footprint is security. And that whilst different member states of the United Nations have started to make some progress in deploying more women as part of their troops and as part of their police components, we still need more civilian women in our security units. And those are the women that do analytical work on sort of like crisis management, early warning, analysis of the security situation. And this component is really charged with protecting the UN staff wherever they're deployed. And I don't know if you recall, but after the UN was attacked in Iraq, this part of the UN was reformed, and it's much bigger than it used to be. So it's also an area where we have a lot of vacancies. Finally, the sort of substantive component is everything that you would think about in UN peace operations in our broad mandate. So that would include human rights, political affairs, civil affairs, which is kind of the community-based peace building aspect of peace operations, as well as even some specialized areas like child protection and women protection, security sector reform. A lot of people with a military or police background are great in security sector reform. And also we usually have a really significant disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration component of our missions. Also an electoral element is there. A lot of our missions are organizing and supporting elections, so people with that expertise also can really find a home in peace operations. And I was chatting with the ladies from NDI, and there's a lot of former NDI people working both in the political parts of the missions, but also the electoral parts. So with our new Secretary General, he's announced that he'd like to achieve gender parity well before 2030. And so there's kind of a quick win that he's identified, and that's by 2021, he wants all his senior appointments to achieve gender parity. So that's basically the heads of missions and the deputy heads of missions. And those are political appointments, and so usually when you have one of those appointments, you're supported by your government. And recently there was also a leadership call that my colleagues put out. Maybe some of you applied for that too. But those are political level positions, and people tend to have 20, 25 years of experience. And a lot of the women that come in from the outside to those senior level positions were ambassadors, especially ambassadors in conflict affected countries, or were in NATO or some sort of alliance or another international organization. Also from the State Department, political appointees in the State Department sort of at the assistant secretary level and higher. And so that's kind of the entry point for the leadership positions. Now for the sort of senior and then the rank and file staff, the Secretary General has said he wants to achieve gender parity by 2026. And that's a really challenging deadline to meet. I've been laughing with people because actually UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was passed when I was with the UN in Bosnia, and I remember sort of going around going, yes, yes, this is excellent. But actually we've had complete stagnation in the representation of women since then. And so, one of the good things about the new Secretary General is he's looking at a broader reform and including the Gender Parity Initiative in his reform agenda. And so we're looking at how recruitment and retention works, but also how to improve the enabling environment for women to work in the UN, including the specific environment for peace operations. For example, I work in UN headquarters right now, and I can avail myself of flexible working arrangements. So on Fridays I work from home, and that's great for me. I have 2 small kids in elementary school, and so that allows me to juggle them a little bit more effectively once a week. Well, when I was in Central African Republic in 2014, 2015, 2016, obviously I had no flexible working arrangement. I was on the ground. But they're looking at, okay, how do we adapt flexible working arrangements to the field? Maybe that would mean, for instance, if you were on maternity leave, you could extend your maternity leave for a month and work from home for a month, on something that you could do from home. So we're really looking at the different ways that we can adapt and make flexible working arrangements work in field missions. Knowing, of course, that when you work in the field, you already get additional and extra vacation. For instance, when I was in Central African Republic, I got an extra week of vacation every 6 weeks, and it's obligatory to leave every 6 weeks. It's part of your health and sanity to get out every 6 weeks. And the same is true, for instance, in Somalia. They do it every 4 weeks, and in places like Mali, every 8 weeks. So you already get additional rest and recuperation allowance, and you already get additional salary for working in a hardship environment, but the UN is looking even deeper and saying, okay, how can we make flexible working arrangements work for the field? So this slide shows a little bit of what is the sort of granularity of the gender gap in peace operations. And really my main message there for you is it gets higher the more senior the position. And that's why we created a senior women talent pipeline. When I was working on this at its inception in 2014, for our director level positions, we were getting 9% of the applicant pool from women. And so we said, hey, if we're going to really make some progress here, we have to have a pipeline of women, and we need to guide them a little bit more through the recruitment process. Now, for director level positions, there's a policy even set by the former Secretary General that every recruitment has to include at least one woman that goes forward for selection. The minimum is 3 candidates, including at least one woman. And in 2014, we had many situations where there wasn't a qualified woman to put forward. And so that's also, the genesis of this initiative to, not only deploy more women, but also to get more women in the applicant pool, make sure that they understand the recruitment process, which is complicated in the UN. So one of the main services we really offer to women who make it into the pipeline is targeting their applications, preparing for any written tests or interviews. So that's the theory behind the pipeline, and we know we need to make progress at every level. And after we open the pipeline at this level for the director level, we'll probably go to the mid level after this and deepen it also for more sort of mid-career women. So, this is sort of the theory behind the gender parity agenda writ large. Really, of course the UN stands for gender parity based on its values, but at the same time, for peace operations, we know that having more women makes us more effective in the field. Most peacekeeping operations now have a protection of civilians mandate. What that means is that the missions have to be closer to the population. They have to understand what are the protection concerns of the population. And guess what? If you have more women on your staff, you can reach more of the population. Women serving as human rights officers, civil affairs officers, and also, of course, women serving as soldiers and as police, they're able to reach and understand the concerns of women more effectively. Also, another thing that you find in peace operations now is, when trouble hits, there's like an instant displaced persons camp outside of all of our bases. And so, having more women staff who can understand that dynamic and also talk in more detail with the women and children who are primarily the ones in those camps. So, I remember last year when we had one of our crises in Central African Republic, we were out and about in the ID camps in Bangui, and I was senior political advisor to the head of mission. So while he would be talking to the political leader or whatever, I would often go talk to the women about the nature of their concerns, why they were there, and that complementarity of having some men, be they senior or junior or whatever, and women also talking to other parts of the population, including women and children, it just helps us have a much better comprehensive picture. And I'm not saying that men can't talk to women, of course they can, but the information that you get as a woman is different. Also, I would have to say that a lot of conflict-affected populations the women are mothers, right? So, you can approach them as a mother and refer to your own children, and it's a way to open up a discussion. It's a way to open up a platform. So, we're just more effective with women on staff. We know it, and we're trying to get more. So I wanted to also just share with you some of the latest results of this initiative and our effort to get more women in peace operations. I'm going to tell you in more detail about Barry Freeman, who's up there on the left, who had a lengthy career in the State Department and then NDI. And she spoke last year here, and Yep, exactly. And Barry and I worked very closely together in Central African Republic. She was the director of political, and I was the head of missions office. So we were always together. She's a very close friend of mine. And then also there's Christine Kapalata there, who is also in the Central African Republic, out in one of the field offices. She's head of a field office, which is a senior director level position in our organogram. When you're head of one of our big multidimensional field offices, your main job is really to make sure that the police, the civilians, and the troops are working together to support the protection of civilians. And that is like a very critical job because you're also working as the area security coordinator for the staff. So that is an important career track now in our missions. Here's Nathalie Ndongo-Sey, who's chief of staff to the UNOAU, which is the small political mission that is in charge with collaboration with the African Union. And so Nathalie, before she was chief of staff there, she also was the head of conduct and discipline teams in South Sudan as well as Liberia. And so I'm sure some of you have heard that we've had sexual exploitation and abuse issues. And so we have a pretty robust conduct and discipline capability that looks at mostly prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. And then if there are problems, then they initiate the legal process and the investigations to hold whatever offender to account. And so that's another career track that's very interdisciplinary. For example, some of those people have a human rights background, some have a legal background, a law or an administrative background. Cecilia Piazza is there. Cecilia is also one of my favorite colleagues. She used to work for the ICRC, so she's Swiss, and she spent many years in extreme hardship location war zones, and now she manages our civil affairs team in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That picture is when she was the head of our regional office in Timbuktu in Mali. The reason why I wanted to note Cecilia in the group is that a lot of people go from humanitarian organizations, especially field-based humanitarian organizations, into peace operations. The last two ladies, the one in the middle is Cassandra Nelson. We'll go into her career path in more detail, but she used to work for Mercy Corps. And finally, Radia Achouri, who's Tunisian, and she worked for the Tunisian Foreign Ministry as a communications expert, and now she's the head of our communications and public affairs section in Mali. And I really encourage you, if you want to learn more about what we do in UN peace operations, to follow the social media of the Mali mission. It's called MINUSMA. And Radia is in charge of it. It's kind of the most advanced social media of any of the missions. And they really give you a good look at what day-to-day life is like in that mission. I was recently there for a couple weeks, and that mission has kind of a bad reputation, right? Because it's the most dangerous UN peacekeeping operation. And indeed, every month or so, a few soldiers die, primarily of IED attacks when they're out on patrol. And of course, whenever you're working in an asymmetrical threat environment with Al-Qaeda affiliated groups, it's dangerous. But I just wanted to stress that, mostly it's the troops who are in harm's way, and the civilians are under a pretty strict security regime. I was just there both in Timbuktu and Gao, and they have very, very rigorous security protocols in place. No civilians have died in the Mali mission. The people who are injured are really in the remote areas, and they're out on patrol. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so here's a little bit about Barry Freeman. And Barry, I was just texting her before the session started, and I said, Barry, if you have one bit of advice for the women that are gathered there today, what would it be? And she said, you can do it, take the leap, So, Barry is with us today, in that spirit. But, Barry, she had like a really normal State Department career. And then she worked for NDI, especially in North Africa and West Africa. She speaks fluent French and was working in particular in Morocco in the field for NDI. And, I remember she was at this event in 2014, and she was like, my kids are older now, I'm thinking of a change, I speak French, I worked in Africa, I think I'm gonna apply. And, it was funny because I remembered her, of course, but then I did the startup of the Central African Republic mission, and it was like right after that, that I went. I think I went, in April 2014, the mission was mandated. So then she applied for the pipeline, she got in, and then she applied to be political director of MINUSMA, and she called me after she put in her application, and I was in Bangui. She was like, Christina, I just wanted to talk to you, I applied, and what do you think? And, I was super stressed out that day. I was like trying to decide where we were gonna deploy troops for the new mission and what's the sort of conflict analysis that's the basis for our deployment. But I dropped everything and I was like, Barry, so great to hear from you. And I really just talked to her about what the situation was on the ground, who the leadership team was, how she might fit in. And she was like, Christina, I have my interview in a couple weeks, can you give me any advice? And I said, okay, so you go to the job opening and you look at the end of the job opening, there are these competencies. You're gonna have 5 questions based on those competencies. Come up with some examples of your career that show your ability according to these competencies, and you'll be good to go. And that's what I like to say about the Senior Women Talent Pipeline, because basically what you have is you have my cell phone number and the project manager's cell phone number. Because, I have to say too, that later when Barry was selected and she was being onboarded, she called me, I was on vacation, and she said, Christina, I realized that it's not like the State Department. You have to find your own apartment. I said, Barry, it's okay. There will be people to help you when you arrive. But that's the kind of service that I want to tell you about with the Senior Women Talent Pipeline. It's kind of like a no question is a stupid question type of thing. And also, I would say too that you can talk to us about your work-life balance challenges, right? Oftentimes I'm talking to women in the pipeline about, okay, if I take that job, where would my kids go to school? And I've been, because I have small children too, I've been to all the international schools in the various locations. I check them out myself. And for the vast majority of the postings in UN peace operations, you can't bring your children with you, but there are a few that you can, and we can tell you about those challenges. So I think that's something that's really special about the pipeline, because we're women, we understand the challenges of being a woman, and we can talk frankly about that. So now I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about Cassandra. And Cassandra, I was telling you, she worked for Mercy Corps. She's a communications specialist, and she worked for Merrill Lynch, Oracle, Apple. And the thing that I like about her career trajectory is that she was working, in HR and in communications, and then she went to Afghanistan. And she got the bug. So she worked in Afghanistan, she worked in Pakistan, and she started her own NGO doing communications, and she just really, she fell in love with that kind of work. And at first it was very, small level, how can I help as a human being? Then she started leveraging her skill set in communications, also digital media, strategic communications. And then she started working for Mercy Corps, doing their communications. Once again, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. And then she came to this event, and she also heard about this. And I remember she also called me a couple times, and she was like, I can do it, Christina. I worked in Mercy Corps in all these difficult locations, and I spent a couple of weeks with her after she was deployed in Somalia. She's very happy, and I have to say Barry's very happy too. They love what they do. And I think the thing that sort of brings that all together is that they had worked in conflict-affected countries before. They were also at the time in their life where it made sense for them. And I have to say, Cassandra, she's been in Somalia for about 3 years. Barry as well. Barry went from being the director of political affairs to the chief of staff. And both of them are really happy with what they do. So, just to give you a little bit of information about, why we're doing this the way we're doing it is, the first Senior Women Talent Pipeline launched in 2014 really focused on people who would be completely new to the organization. And we also, we market it for the internal UN staff and in particular for staff who are with the UN agencies, funds, and programs. But the idea of the pipeline is really to help you navigate the application process and the recruitment process. Now, in the sort of second generation, we're going into sort of the mid-level positions, and we're also looking at more mentoring and career pathing for existing staff. But the initial idea was really helping people navigate and sort of make sense of a complex recruitment system. And we also wanted to bring new skills, fresh ideas into the organization. I did the statistics the other day on, how can we achieve gender parity, right? We're at 28%. Even if we hired a woman for every single vacant position, we still wouldn't achieve gender parity. So, really what that means is that we can't do it with the existing women, right? Like, even if, every single woman is promoted, it's still, we don't achieve gender parity. So actually having the new intake is a really critical aspect of the strategy. This is just sort of a guide on what we're looking for as far as this call goes. All the director level positions we're asking for require 15 to 17 years of professional experience. And just to say a few words about these areas, the one that's kind of the most difficult to explain is mission support. And so that's the director or the chief of mission support is the chief of administration. Administration, logistics, HR, finance, IT, the whole support capability. And that's, the chief operating officer, basically. Civil affairs, like I was saying before, that's really, a lot of former humanitarians go into civil affairs. It's the really community-based aspect of the mission. And the vast majority of civil affairs officers are deployed outside of the capital city. It's the backbone of the civilian substantive component. Now, rule of law and security institutions, that includes justice and corrections, so everything to do with reform of the judicial and the corrections system. And in some missions, like the one in Central African Republic, we also have an executive mandate in part of that area. So it's a very, really hands-on approach. And then there's also security sector reform and DDR. So those sort of reform of the police and the army and the whole scope of the security institutions, and then the reintegration of former combatants. So that's kind of the full scope of that. And the way the positions work, we do have director level positions for security sector reform, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. And then for justice, it's usually combined with corrections. You don't have to know both, but it's great if you do. Public information, that component, it's kind of interesting because in addition to supervising the spokesperson's capability and digital and social media, a lot of big peacekeeping operations have their own radio, and that's the backbone of the public information capability. So if you go to South Sudan, Central African Republic, the Congo, or Mali, the UN radio is the only media that reaches the whole population. And so sometimes they use community-based radio, but it's basically the peace building and the public information backbone of the mission. So it's actually a really large component. So if you know something about radio, it's a huge plus. And then political affairs, most people understand that. Most of the people who who work at the senior level in political affairs, were diplomats or worked for NDI. Or they came through sort of a governance or political institution building background. So the way it works is that you need to have 15 years of experience if you have a master's degree or higher, and 17 years if you have a bachelor's. And I also just wanted to note that, in 2016, 50% of our recruitments. In 2016, we did about 1,600 recruitments for international staff positions, which gives you an idea of the turnover. People stay for about 5 years or less, so we're always recruiting. And so we had about 1,600 recruitments in 2016. Half of them were for Mali and the Central African Republic, because those were missions just starting up. But I also wanted to tell you that really your chances of getting a job in UN peace operations are sort of tripled or quadrupled if you speak French, as well as English. And right now, it's a huge asset also to speak Arabic, but those missions are quite small. And I remember when I first took up this position, I started doing an Arabic speakers campaign because I thought, oh, well, we're gonna have peace in Syria, so we've gotta get ready. And that's not happened yet, but I do believe that, in Yemen and Syria, when peace comes, there was very likely to be large peacekeeping operations there, and we'll have a big surge in demand. So English is sort of the basic language that everybody at least has to have working knowledge of, but then for Francophone missions, really day-to-day business is in French. Just have a couple more slides and then we'll go to questions. So, I had this slide last time, Patricia, and I brought it back for this round, just to explain a little bit about what is the pipeline and what is it not. I mean, it's really there so we have a standby group that we keep informed about vacancies, and we try to channel you towards vacancies that you're qualified for. And we also, sort of demystify the application process. And for instance, in the last project, we had a consultant who did interview prep with the candidates. And I should say too that the current project is funded by the UK, and we've also had funding from the Netherlands and Japan. And the UK was very generous with this grant, and so should note that. But so, we basically would give you individual attention, both in targeting your application, preparing your application, and then with the recruitment process. It's not a way to avoid the recruitment process. You still have to go through it. And, it may be in the future if the Secretary General decides there should be a specific track for women, there might be some sort of fast track proposal that goes through. But for the moment, everyone has to go through the same process. So we really support you in going through that process, which can be lengthy. Although I have to say that for the D2 director level positions, it can also be pretty quick. I think it took Barry maybe 4 months from the point of application to deployment. This we're going to keep in the slide deck just because I know you're going to send it around, Patricia. But it's really just to reiterate that how to prepare your application, how to put yourself out there in a way that our recruitment team and our hiring managers can understand your expertise. That's one of the services that we offer should you join our pipeline. And finally, just to give you a little bit of action planning. So we're going to open the pipeline on the 15th of June, and the applications will be taken at impactpool.org. They're our contractor for recruitment and promotion, and so they'll help us promote the pipeline, and that's where the applications will be lodged. And when you get to that page, you'll have the choice to apply for one of these areas, but you can also apply for multiple areas. And the application will look at your experience, the countries that you've worked in, as well as your language skills, and then you'll have the opportunity to upload your CV. we'll screen the CVs, and then we'll do some assessment, and there'll be like an interdepartmental UN panel that will choose the members of the pipeline. And then once we decide on the pipeline, that's where you get the targeted support for applications, and we'll work with you individually on what you're interested in. So that's a little bit about what we're up to, and I'm very happy to take your questions. And I would also just say, on the presentation, you have my contact information as well, and you can always follow up with me afterwards.
Fantastic. I'm just going to open it up, and then we have time for lots of questions. So, about how many applications did you have last time around? What were the lessons learned, and what were the big changes this time around in any kind of requirements? And lastly, you did mention going forward with other age groups.
Right.
So,
Great question. Thanks so much, Patricia. So last time we got about 3,000 applications, and I should note too that we have a track where you can be nominated by your government, or you can do a self-application. And really the countries that went through the nomination process, it was basically the Nordic countries, the UK and the Netherlands, and a few other countries. We do that because we're a member states organization, but you don't have to be nominated by your government. And those two tracks have equal due consideration. So we had 3,000 applicants last time, and we chose about 150 people for the pipeline. We had about 12 people who've been placed, and another 15 to 20 have been rostered for quick selection and deployment. So, and Barry and Cassandra and some of those other women I was showing to, we are the success stories from that first phase. The lessons learned were really that we didn't have enough people bilingual in French and English, and English and Arabic. And we also didn't have enough women from the South. So we were really top heavy on North America and Europe in the deployments and in the members of the pool. So, we did outreach visits to Africa, in particular West Africa and North Africa. And so we're hoping that we'll have a more diverse pool this time. And as far as the changes, the UN recruitment system is quite bureaucratic, so the requirements are always the same as far as like the number of years of experience. We are trying to be more flexible with field experience, and let me explain there. We've tried, for instance, to take into consideration, Catherine, I hope you don't mind if I use you as an example. Catherine and I worked together in IRC when she was younger, before she had kids. Now she's been still working on conflict-affected populations and conflict-related issues, but from a, backstopping political and headquarters function. So we're trying to say, hey, that's also field experience because you're supporting field operations. So we're trying to make that combination of, okay, it's not that you have been working in conflict countries for 15 years, but you've been working in and on conflict countries for 15 years, that kind of thing, and that level of flexibility to recognize that not everyone can be deployed in a war zone there for 20 years, right? So for instance, I started really young. I started working in former Yugoslavia when I was 26, and so I actually had 10 years of field experience before I had my first child. But that's more difficult to do now, because the structure of our workforce has changed a little bit. The average age of somebody in a peacekeeping operation is 46. And so our entry level is a little bit later in life, so it's more mid-career. So we're trying to take that into consideration in how we recruit. And then after we do this call for the director level, we will push down to the mid-level. We haven't quite decided if we're gonna just do everything mid-level, or we might choose a specific area, like logistics and supply chain, where we have a really huge deficit of women. Security is another area where we might make a special call. So really our main lessons learned were, we did really good with the North. We didn't do well enough with the South. We didn't have enough people who were bilingual in French and English. And so diversity and the challenge of diversity is a real lesson learned.
Any changes in the age?
Oh, thanks for mentioning that. So actually the UN General Assembly did change the retirement age from 62 to 65. And so that does offer a little bit more flexibility for people who are in the later parts of their career. You know, I was very much inspired. The first head of mission I worked with was Elizabeth Wren in Bosnia, and she, you know, I was 27, and she said, you know, Christina, I didn't start any of this business until after I was a grandmother. And, you know, that was really inspirational for me because, you know, as a young person, I thought, oh, well, maybe I can step out for a while and come back. And I think that a lot of women, you know, like Barry, who've had a long career, but then they're like, hey, I have more flexibility now, I want to go to the field. And so it's important to note that, you know, our retirement age is now 65 for new recruits.
So you can start at 60.
Well, the application process, as long as you are 64 or younger, you'll be screened in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, before, I'm gonna take everybody's questions and I'll take a few together. I just wanna recognize another board member who joined us, Kate Irvin. Raise your hand, thanks a lot. Okay, so let's open it up. If you could identify yourself and what, we're going to take 3 questions together. I think that's good so that we can get
Great.
to everyone. 1, and who else had the 2 back there? Okay, 3, okay, go ahead.
I'm going to truncate mine since I have 2 parts to it. The question I have for you is, I'm looking out a few years. Right now, my possibilities, I'm at the State Department, sorry. My name is Tess Del Pratt, State Department. I have the opportunity to retire within 6 years. Does it make sense to join Impact Pool now? Or would it be better to wait until I'm ready to move? And then the second part of that question is, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the nexus between UN contracts and Impact Pool, and how, and is that another way in?
Okay, great.
Okay, the woman in the back, yes, please, yes.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Stewart-Clark. I also work at the Department of State. And I was wondering if you could give any tips or advice for those of us looking to build skill sets and prepare to move into that senior level. I'd say probably still 5 to 10 years out. Currently doing quite a bit of work in security affairs and peacekeeping operations and Central Africa,
Great,
et cetera.
great,
So beyond language skills, what other skill sets would be helpful?
great. Good question.
Yes, and right here, yes.
Yeah, I am Catherine. I used to work with Christina a long time ago, and I left the State Department in January. My question is, if you happen to know the statistics on what percentage are family duty stations, which I
Right.
assume are mostly the political missions,
Yeah.
and also any more on the usual timeline for recruitment
Sure.
in terms of planning.
Okay, great. Great questions from all of the State Department ladies. And I was the regional refugee coordinator with the State Department Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration in Serbia and Montenegro, also covering Croatia. And then I also worked for USAID in Croatia doing a big reintegration project. So, I know your world a little bit from the late 90s, early 2000s. And, of course, you said except for language, but I have to reiterate French, because you have time, right? If you're thinking about the skills for the future. And even, I would say with French, we have 2 levels. We have fluency and we have working knowledge. And working knowledge is really, you can work at the community level. It's sort of like community groups, mayors, chiefs. Whereas like fluency is really, you're talking to ministers, you can draft legal documents, that kind of thing. And depending on the function, we have both levels. So, French is really important, and I don't see it going down, quite frankly. Arabic is also important, but really French is really, really critical. As far as like a technical skill that is good to have, anything to do with reintegration of war-affected populations. It's a big part of our mandates, and in collaboration with NGOs and UN agencies, funds, and programs. So anytime you also work in the coordination space for how to design and implement strategies to make communities more resilient, to protect communities, or to help IDPs return. That's a really important skill set. And I guess the other thing I would say with security sector reform is a really, really great skill to have, and it's really broad. Once again, the strategic planning element of security sector reform is really important. So it's figuring out, okay, how do you work with a national government and that society writ large to understand the conflict dynamics and promote the redesign and training of security forces that are more attuned to the population and more able to protect human rights. Oftentimes, in conflict-affected countries, the security forces were used to perpetrate violence. So how do you flip that over and make them a source of protection? I think another skill that's good to have is, in the protection space, in peacekeeping, we call it protection of civilians, the humanitarians call it protection, but it's really about, understanding what are the drivers of conflict and how do we make sure that that community is more protected and resilient to falling back into conflict. Catherine, as far as the family duty stations go, I would note, well, Addis Ababa is one where we do have this this office supporting the African Union in collaboration with the African Union. Another, good in our world family duty station is Kinshasa, where they do have a lot of international schools, and people are pretty happy there with their families. When we did the field work for the gender parity policy changes, we were looking at Bamako as well, and we're trying to create something called an as-if family duty station, where people can opt in to take a family duty station package in lieu of a non-family duty station package. So I hope that there are going to be more in the future. When it comes to the special political missions, we also have one in Lebanon. So Beirut is a family duty station that a lot of people try for. Jerusalem is another place where we have a political mission. Those are some of them off the top of my head. And then looking at impact pool and what do they do. So, they're our contractor. So, we pay them to promote our vacancies on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And if you sign up with them, they give you more push notifications about jobs in this conflict-related space. And they have 18 premium partners, including a lot of humanitarian NGOs and UN agencies. They only, they advertise for us and then they take you to our website to place your application, right? So they don't actually do the recruitment on their platform. Now for the Senior Women Talent Pipeline, they are going to have a little bit, they're gonna house the applications for us, but then, if you're chosen from the pipeline, you will have to apply through our recruitment system. So it's a tool, it's not like a parallel space. And as far as your question about should I apply today if I'm interested 5 years from now, it's a tough question, right? Because, obviously we don't want to take people into the pipeline who are not serious about working in the field. And one of the challenges is you get a lot of people who want to work in New York, but we're not hiring for New York. I would say if you're interested in the next 2-3 years, but if it's more like 5 to 7 years, probably not. But 2 to 3 years, I'd say okay to that.
How often do you think you'll be doing this?
Well, we did it in 2014 and now it's
Okay.
2017.
Okay.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea. And now we'll be pushing down to the lower levels too. The big game changer is the Secretary General's gender parity agenda, right? So before it was like, oh, we're not doing very well, we need to do better. Now we have a deadline.
Okay,
Thank you.
next round of questions. I'd like to see some hands. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Yes.
So my
Tell us
question is,
who you are.
Marlene Davis. I currently work with Motorola Solutions, and this field really intrigues me, so I wanted to see what it's all about. And my question is, do you have to be, to have the experience? You mentioned what the 15 years are and the 17 years are. I've never worked in this field, but I've been working for 30 years. Yeah, so how is that weighted for experience?
Great, good
Okay.
question.
Yes.
Mine is actually related.
Tell us who you are.
I'm Catherine Kingsbury with the Livingston Group. I have a graduate degree as well as 17 years of experience in government relations, representing countries here in the United States and abroad, but not a direct, state or NDI/RI. So how does someone like me, are you trying to attract somebody from business or in a related field, someone who has a different skill set that could be a fresh perspective?
Okay, great.
And I'm Spencer Bell. I'm a rising third year at Georgetown Law, but I'm working at Women in International Security right now. I'm thrilled to be here. So my question is, and actually dovetails well with these other two, both as advice to someone who's in their mid-career, but also towards the beginning, who's maybe pursuing a different avenue, going through the law, say, pursuing a law degree, maybe an LLM. Is there any advice that you think in particular that we should take from that in terms of how we get into this field later, how we're planning if we enter the pipeline 10 years down the road? I know you mentioned with the sexual exploitation and abuse claims within the UN that there's lawyers work for that, but also what about things like cultural property destruction, working with someone who has knowledge of UNESCO and things like that? Is there anything in particular you find that you're going to be looking for?
Great, good questions.
Great.
Okay, so,
The third one. You wanna-
sure, I can, colleague is Spencer is a law student, and so what are sort of the entry points for somebody with a law background? So maybe Spencer, I'll start with you. Having a law degree is really a good overall, functional skill set, and a lot of human rights officers have a law background. And maybe they worked with advocacy groups like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International. Maybe they did a little field work with those groups and then are picked up by us. Likewise, we have our own internal legal capability, and the legal officers, they would do a lot of things related to, we have a status of forces agreement with the host governments, so setting in place the legal structure for how we have duty-free, customs-free, and immunities, right? So they're really important in all of our missions, and each mission has a legal team of 10 to 15 people working on those things. The conduct and discipline aspect, a lot of those people are lawyers too. And the reason why law is useful there is the investigations capacity. And one of the challenges of sexual exploitation and abuse is that we do an initial investigation and then we hand it over if the alleged perpetrator is from one of the troops. We hand over the case then to that country for further investigation. So following up with that country on the accountability side is really important. You also mentioned cultural heritage. It's not our core mandate, but it's a support. The preservation of cultural heritage in places like Mali is a big part of the mandate. And if you check out the MINUSMA social media site, you'll see a lot about how the mission is preserving the cultural heritage of Mali, especially around Timbuktu. And then as far as the sort of private sector, so it's a really good question, because traditionally on the sort of executive level mission support side of things, so administration, finance, IT, supply chain, engineering, a lot of those people would come from either the military or big multinational companies like Motorola. And we were chatting before, and the UN Peacekeeping has business with Motorola. We use their radios, and so understanding that space. I think when you're working in a big multinational, you have opportunities for deployments in different locations. And what I've seen is, people who come from Shell, Toyota, probably Motorola too on the IT side. I haven't seen it recently, but they may not have worked in conflict-affected countries, but they worked in areas where there's a challenging supply chain or limited infrastructure. So it could be like developing countries as well. So they need to understand the challenges of how do you set up an operation in a more affected country. One of the women who came through our program was working in NATO, in Brussels, for instance, and she had not done like the overseas deployment, but she had been supporting NATO troops from Brussels. So it's not, in a lot of our a lot of our job descriptions, it will say that conflict or post-conflict experience is required, but we're broadening it to include like volatile environments, trying to take into consideration that, especially on the mission support side, really what we're looking for is, have you worked in a difficult environment where there's a lot of challenges related to the business model, right? Maybe it's a landlocked country, maybe there's pockets of conflict, like people who work in oil companies, they may work in insecure environments, but not necessarily a war zone. So if you've never, been, done an assignment overseas, that's pretty challenging, right? Because one of the things that we're looking for is resilience. And it is true that, you do need to be resilient in the face of insecure environments to work with us. Maybe someday down the road, we'll figure out a way to assess that resilience beyond work experience. But for the moment, having proven yourself in a challenging environment is one of the things that we definitely look for.
Okay, yes, so here, and let's see if we have any other questions. Okay, 1, 2, anyone else? Okay, we'll take those two, go ahead.
Lauren Van Meter at U.S. Institute of Peace at George Washington University. My husband served in 3 UN peacekeeping missions.
Where?
Mozambique, Angola, and El Salvador.
Okay, great.
And now works in IT infrastructure.
Mhm.
And we were interested in both applying.
Great,
and I was
good
wondering, so how kind is the UN to couples who do this, and in terms of assignments and in terms of applications?
Great.
Yes, here.
Okay, I've had 2 questions, one sort of nuts and bolts.
And tell us who you
Oh,
are.
sorry, Beth Ingalls, State Department. First question is, how easy is it to move around once you get in, to move around to these different missions? And then the other is the sort of nuts and bolts of the application process, because I've done a couple applications now. What should we focus on in terms of your CV? There's lots of competencies and requirements, and is there like a certain place you should emphasize or focus on when you're
Great, good
listening to
questions. Good questions, thank you.
experience?
Anyone else? Okay, yes, please, go, yes, and
Hi,
black.
Suzanne Ware from the Joint Staff. I just was wondering if you could put up the last slide again, because that went really quickly.
Well,
I
we're
don't
also
know.
going to share that with everybody.
Oh, you're gonna share that with
Yeah.
everyone? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, so from USIP and GW, the dual career deployment. So I hear you, and indeed I married somebody in peacekeeping, so I have lived it. So at the moment we'll try to do the best we can, right? It's not like the State Department where really they work with you on a dual career placement. We're trying to do better, and in the new Secretary General's deliberations, this is coming up. And so I do hope that we can do better. Right now, both partners have to go through the recruitment process separately and, target your applications accordingly. But I would say that, for instance, when I was doing the startup in Central African Republic, there were some people, the leadership sees it as a huge asset because those people are they're a little more chilled out. when they're together with a family member. And so we try always to do our best. And so right now it is based on, targeting your application to the same locations. And, that's definitely something that, if a pipeline member wanted to do that, we would definitely work with them and their spouse or their partner. And it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. Right now it's not legislated per se in the rules, but like I said, we will definitely go the extra mile for any pipeline member in that regard. Then you were asking about moving around. Who asked that question? Oh, okay, great question. So it's so easy to move around once you get in the system. The hard part is getting in the system, right? And so we have a roster-based recruitment system, and once the minimum amount of time you can spend in any one deployment is 1 year. And I don't recommend staying for 1 year. 2 years is really better. But after you've served for 1 year and you're on, if you've gotten a job, that means you're on a roster, because if you're selected, you're on the roster. And once you're on a roster, you can apply for what's called recruit from roster job openings. And 85 to 90% of all our recruitment is from the roster. So really getting on the roster is the whole key. And for our pipeline members, in addition to applying for specific vacancies, we'll also usher you through the roster-based vacancies, because that's really the main entry point at the D1 level. At the D2 level, which is the more senior director, there is no roster, but at the D1 level, there is a roster. So, once you're on a roster, you apply to this closed group of recruit from roster job openings, and it's quite easy to move around. It's quite easy to move around, based on your skill sets, right? So, for instance, I'm probably not a good example, but when I was in Central African Republic, I was a senior political officer, and if I speak French and English and I worked in Central African Republic, and tomorrow I decide I want to go to Mali, I just apply to those recruit from roster job openings. And as a woman who speaks French and English, with experience in another location, you're very, very in a very, very good situation. So a lot of people move around between the missions in the Middle East because they have that skill set, and within Africa. And I should also say that 80% of our civilian staff are deployed in Africa, so having Africa-related experience is a real plus, and people really move around a lot within the Africa missions.
Okay.
And you also asked about what to focus on in your CV. Okay, so each job opening has different sections. The first section is the organizational setting, then the duties and responsibilities, then the competencies, languages, work experience, and education. And so the key for you is languages and work experience. So for languages, if the job opening calls for fluency in English, there's a part of the application that asks you to self-assess for language. And to be fluent, you have to say that you're fluent in reading, writing, understanding, and speaking, all those elements. If the job opening is calling for knowledge of or working knowledge, then you have to be confident or higher in 2 of those 4 areas. That's on the little tip sheet. And that screening is automated, right? So if you don't meet that threshold, your application is automatically rejected. Obviously, you should not lie about your language abilities, and any job opening that requires another language, you will be assessed in that language as well, either in the test or the interview. But because it's self-assessment, that's kind of tricky, right? Because one person's confident is another person's fluent. So, just note the screening levels for working knowledge and fluency, and look at what is the requirement in the job opening. And then work experience is also really critical, because that's where there's some key words that say, for instance, maybe for a security sector reform vacancy, program management is a requirement, because they want somebody who can look at multi-sectoral programs and can manage a budget. So, if you've done that, but you were saying it in a different way, you might slip through the cracks. So it's good to look under work experience and use the language in the description of your experience that's under work experience. And all the recruiter screening is based on what the language is under work experience. It goes sentence by sentence. You know, there'll be something required, another thing required, another thing required, and then like maybe 3 or 4 desirable criteria. And you have to meet all the required criteria, and then we may or may not invoke the desirable criteria. Now, here's one thing, Patricia. Men apply for everything.
Right.
Women only apply when they're like 125% sure that they meet everything. So please apply. And if you don't meet some of the desirable criteria, still apply. You know, what's really required is what is required. And also describe your skills in the way that is set in under work experience in the vacancy announcement.
Okay, any other questions? No other questions? Okay, well, maybe some of them might want to come up and speak to you personally.
Yep, I'm happy to take your
This
questions
is
after.
fantastic. Thank you all for coming, and Christina, thank you.